Alright guys, welcome to RC Mojo. This week we're going to get the Comical Grasshopper up on its wheels, making a rolling chassis. We're on to bag D, where we've got some zip ties and servo tape, which is always handy. There's also two very meaty springs for the front bumper, plus the usual bag of screws and all the other fixings. With all the bits poured out into tubs and tidied away, we can get started with step 16, mating the chassis with the gearbox. Right, for parts all we need is 8 3x10 self-tappers and the two big bits of buggy that we've put together so far. Being Tamiya, the fit of the two parts is excellent, so it's really easy to offer up the gearbox to the chassis and get all the holes to line up. There's 4 screws on each side, screw them in so they're still a little bit loose, then go round and nip them up. When done, you should have a rather nice, stiff chassis. Step 17, battery and body mounts, and the rear light pods. This time we need 2 M2x5s, 4 3x15 self-tappers and 2 3mm washers. For plastic, top to bottom, we have 2 L10s, the LED retainers, 2 L1s, the LED mounts, 2 L5 rear body posts, and when I notice they're missing, 2 L4 battery cover mounts. First, to get the small screws out of the way, we're going to mount the LED retainers to the mounts. I found it easiest to pop the screw into its hole in the mount, then offer up the retainer and thread in the screw. Remember, it's a tiny machine screw going into plastic, so watch out how tight you do it up. It's not going to take much to strip out the plastic. Next, now we've got the battery cover mounts out, we can fit them to the sides of the chassis. The side of the mount with the round holes goes over the short post right at the back of the chassis. Then we offer up the body post to the top square post on the mount so it's facing backwards and install one of the screws. Then in the bottom hole we fit the LED mount, again using one of the self-tappers, but this time with a washer under its head. Before you tighten the screw up all the way, you'll want to position the mount so it's facing backwards, nice and level. Same again on the other side, and that's the rear mounts fitted. Step 18, the front body posts. Now this one's super quick. All we need are 2 3x10 self-tappers and 2 L6 body posts. The posts offer up to the square nubs near the front of the chassis, it doesn't matter which way round they go, and install a screw. Nip it up, repeat on the other side, and that's it, the front body posts are fitted. Step 19, the side frames. For this one we need 2 M2x10s, 2 3x15 self-tappers, 6 3x12 self-tappers, 4 3x10 self-tappers, 2 3x8 self-tappers, 2 3mm washers and 2 2mm washers. For plastic we have an M6 and M7, the front parts of the frame, which are sided, so keep track of which is which. Then on the right of the manual we have 2 L2s, the antenna mounts, 2 L3s, the rear parts of the frame, and 2 L2s, the nudge bars that go in the middle. We'll also need the ESC as they want us to fit the power switch in this step too. First we'll build up the two frames. For the right side we start with the M6 front part and offer up the front of an L2 nudge bar. The bar has keyed ends, so there's no problem getting everything nice and straight. We just need to screw in a 3x10 and nip it up. For the L3 part, it's largely the same. Just offer it up and thread in another 3x10. There is a bit of a gotcha though. L3 will happily fit two ways, so check carefully with the diagram to make sure you get it the right way. The other frame is the same, except we use the M7 at the front. Again, you need to make sure that you get L3 the right way round, which of course I didn't. I think it was well past midnight at this point, so mistakes were starting to creep in. Still, it's only one screw at this stage, but if you've already mounted it to the chassis before you notice, it's still quite doable, but it is a bit of a faff. On this side we also need to fit the power switch. Now because we're using a Tamiya ESC, the switch is a direct fit. If you upgrade, you might find you need to stick the switch down somewhere with some servo tape. We'll need to remove the two black screws from the switch so we can replace them with the slightly longer silver ones and washers from the kit. We want to thread them in so there's a couple of millimeters gap between the washer and the switch housing. Then we offer the switch up to the slots in the frame and we tighten up the screws. You'll want to position it so the on side is towards the front of the frame so it matches the manual. It'll work either way round, but it's good to do it right. Next we'll attach the frame to the chassis. Now there's a few different length screws, so double check as you go. The rearmost is a 3x12, as are the front two. For now we'll just do them up so they're still a little bit loose. The interesting one is the third hole. This is where an L2 mounts for the antenna mount. The hole lines up with the hole in the frame and we use a 3x15 to attach it. The idea is we can set the angle of the antenna tube. Initially we'll leave it slightly loose while we fit a 3x8 self-tapper with a washer under its head in the slot and thread it into the frame. We want to hold the mount so it's as vertical as it will go and then nip up the screws. Go around and nip up the other four too, and that's this side complete. Repeat with the other side, but without the switch of course, and that's step 19 complete. Step 20, electronics mounting and antenna tubes. For screws we need two 3x8 self-tappers and two 3mm washers. For plastic all we need are two L13s, the antenna tube mounts. Now before we begin we're going to diverge from the manual a bit. Tamiya are going to want us to stick down the ESC and receiver in this step, but I much prefer getting the body and other bits fitted first so we can see how and where everything's going to actually fit. We've got our Wild Willy style driver to fit on the top of the chassis, so it makes sense to have all that in place before we start sticking bits down. Plus, if we loosen the two switch screws, we can take the ESC away, making life much easier without all those wires getting in the way. Right, with that lot gone, we can fit the antenna tube mounts. They sit on the platform on the antenna tube mounts with the flat towards the inside to stop them spinning. Then we just need to thread in a 3x8 with a washer to attach them. Do both sides, and when the time comes we're going to slot in some antenna tube to make the flagpoles. For now they're just going to get in the way, so we'll come back to them later. Step 21, the wheels and front tyres. We need 20 2.6x8 self-tappers, 4 wheels and 4 of the coloured inserts. Now this is a really simple step, there's absolutely nothing that can go wrong, unless it's after 1 AM and you should have gone to bed. All we need to do then is offer up one of the coloured inserts, then from the inside screw in 5 screws. Simple. Except the wheels aren't symmetrical, they have a small offset. If you look at the cross-section diagram it's really obvious. But I didn't. Still, the wheels went together perfectly in all other respects. It's not really a big deal though. When I finally do notice, it's just a case of removing the screws and swapping the insert to the other side. Anyway, assuming you have yours the right way round, we can install the front tyres. They simply stretch over the wheel with the tyre fitting into the slots. It should be really simple, and for the most part it is. However, the tyres have a bit of a step on the side and I found they tend to sit a little bit off centre. You can see the crown of the tyre is a little bit offset. That's because the bead isn't sitting nicely. From the outside it's not at all obvious. If you use something like a small screwdriver, you can use it like a tyre lever to get the tyre settled into place. Just be gentle with it, there aren't any foams to damage, but if you're a bit heavy you could always cause some damage to the tyre. When it's right, you'll find it sits nice and even on the wheel. Step 22, the rear tyres. Now this one's pretty much the same as the front, except the tyres are directional. As long as you make one for the left and one for the right though, you're good to go. Pull the tyres over the wheels and job done. Now it's worth mentioning, some of you might be wondering where the tyre glue is. Now Tamiya don't mention glue, which I suppose as a beginner kit does make sense. You can really get yourself into a mess if you're not careful. Also, skipping ahead a bit, after a few runs on grass and rough gravel, the tyres are still nicely seated on the wheels. I think if you fit a much faster motor you might find they come adrift, but with the stock silver can they work just fine without any glue. Step 23, fitting the wheels. We'll need 4 M4 flange wheel nuts, 4 2x10mm pins, 2 1150 bearings, 4 B14 wheel hexes, the chassis and of course the wheels. Starting at the rear we need to press in a bearing, slide in a pin and offer up a hex. Next, a rear wheel goes on, and then we thread on one of the nuts. Now this is where I noticed that something was a bit wrong with the wheel. It was binding on the suspension arms and locking up completely. With a bit of thinking, which was pretty difficult at that time of night, I realised what the problem was, and I swapped the insert to the other side. You can see this time the wheel fits much better, and the insert is actually an insert, not sticking out. The problem now is I've managed to fit the wrong rear wheel. The tread is facing the wrong way. So after swapping the wheels and doing up the nuts, again we have one wheel fitted. The moral of the story is, don't build when you're dopey. It adds so much extra work. The other rear wheel goes on the same way, so we can just cut to that fitted. Nice. The front wheels are a little bit different. They already have the bearings in, and they have body clips in the pinhole so the axle doesn't drop out from the inside. We need to pull the pin while keeping a hold of the axle and fit the pin and slide on a hex. Once the hex is on, it's not going to fall apart, so we can offer up a wheel and thread on a nut. Repeat on the other side, and we have a rolling chassis, complete with some soft but ever so smooth suspension. Far better than you'd expect on a basic Tamiya kit. Far better than those old friction shocks. Now, I was planning a damper upgrade, but as long as these ones don't leak, I think they're going to do just fine as they are. Step 24, the front bumper. Now there's a couple of choices of bumpers here. I'm going to go with the Grasshopper bumper, so we need two long 3x43 self-tappers, 2 springs and the M1 bumper. If you're a beginner, you might want to go with the F9 wide bumper and the shorter screws. The wide bumper covers the front wheels for a far better protection if you clip a curb or other unmovable object. Fitting any of the bumpers is largely the same though. We just slide the springs onto the bumper posts and offer it up to the posts on the front of the chassis. Then insert a screw from the front and thread it in. Same goes on the other side, then tighten them up. Keep going until you feel them hit the end of the threads. It's going to feel extremely stiff, but surprisingly, if you have a head-on crash, it's still going to absorb quite a lot of the impact. Step 25, the battery cover. We're going to need two 3x12 self-tappers, 2 large body clips. The ones that we took off the front axles will do just fine. The battery cover M2 and 2 L7 exhaust tips. The tips offer up to the cover and are fitted with the screws. The parts are keyed, so if you spin them round they'll drop into position so you can tighten up the screws. The tips do have some silver decals on the decal sheet which you can fit, but I think if you want to make them silver you'd probably be better off using paint. Of course, you can just leave them black. When the tips are on, we can grab the chassis and slide in a 6-cell Nimi. Offer the cover up to the posts, clip in the clips, and if we'd fitted the ESC and radio, we'd be ready to power it all up. But that's going to come later. For now, we're going to remove the battery until we're actually ready to use it. And well, that's going to be about it for this week, I think. Technically, we're not quite at the end of bag D, but the rest is more bodywork rather than chassis, so I think it's a good time to stop. Next time we'll put together the driver, get the scissors out, and probably play with some masking tape and paint. Should be fun. As always then, thanks for watching, like if you liked, subscribe if you haven't, and leave a comment if there's something on your mind. Bye guys!